Think. Forget the sleek silhouette. Under the steel skin of the T-72 lies a mechanical trap. Right now, a carousel holding 22 high-explosive fragmentation rounds is spinning directly beneath the gunner's feet. Why did Soviet designers seat men atop a powder keg? The answer lies in geometry. The military goal was simple: make the tank smaller, lighter, and harder to hit. They removed the human loader. This cut the hull length by 1 meter and lowered the roof. But it replaced a soldier with a machine, the autoloader. Inside the turret, space is a luxury the crew doesn't have. The gunner and commander are wedged into steel crevices between the massive 125mm breech and the turret walls. Movement is nearly impossible. The autoloader's mechanical arm reaches down. It grabs a heavy propellant charge. It rams the projectile into the breech. Metal teeth gnash just centimeters from the gunner's elbow. One wrong move and the machinery consumes limbs. The smell of hydraulic fluid and burnt ozone fills the cramped space. The system works fast, 7 seconds between shots, no human fatigue, no slowing down. But the cost of this efficiency is total. In the West, they call it the jack-in-the-box effect. The ammunition is not shielded. It sits openly in the hull, surrounding the men. If a shaped charge pierces the armor, the 22 rounds ignite instantly. 100 kilograms of TNT detonate under the seats. 40 years later, this design choice would kill thousands of crews in the Donbass. The explosion is absolute. The internal pressure builds until the welds snap. The 12-ton turret is launched hundreds of feet into the air like a discarded toy. Inside, there is no time to scream, no time to reach the hatch, and no chance to escape the fire. Western tanks use blowout panels to vent fire outward. The T-72 keeps the fire inside with the crew. If the carousel detonates, the driver has milliseconds before the fire punches through the bulkhead. Survival is a matter of geometry. The driver sits in the front, slightly isolated from the main propellant charges. In some cases, drivers crawled out of holes while the turret lay 50 meters away. But these are the lucky ones. For most, the overpressure kills before the flames reach the seat. Why carry a full load if every shell is a landmine? Crews in modern conflicts often leave half their ammunition behind. They trade firepower for a few extra seconds of life. Even the T-90, with its armored internal containers, cannot fix the fundamental flaw. The metal is too thin, the space is too tight. The driver's station is the roomiest part of the machine. The levers are responsive, the view is clear. But the gearbox is a death sentence. The T-72 has a reverse speed of only 5 kilometers per hour. A human walks faster than this tank retreats. If an ATGM launches from the tree line, the driver cannot back away in time. He is a stationary target in slow motion. The tank can disappear underwater using a 5-meter snorkel tube. The commander's hatch is replaced by a pipe. The crew seals every gap and activates the overpressure system. It is a terrifying procedure, rarely used outside of training grounds. This same system is designed to keep out radioactive dust during a tactical nuclear strike. Soviet doctrine built the T-72 to operate on a poisoned, irradiated battlefield, where crews were expected to last only a few hours. Soviet generals learned a brutal lesson in 1945. Quality loses to quantity. On the fields of Kursk, the Red Army traded 4 T-34s for every single German Panther. The cost of victory was a mountain of charred steel. But the Kremlin didn't see a tragedy, they saw a formula. This deadly architecture wasn't a mistake, it was a requirement. The Soviet military doctrine of the 1960s demanded a machine born from the scars of World War II. They needed waves. They needed a tank that could be produced faster than the enemy could reload. Did the crews matter? Not according to the math. In the eyes of the high command, a tanker was a component with a shelf life of exactly 1 major engagement. By the late 1960s, this philosophy of calculated slaughter moved from the chalkboard to the factory floor. Engineers began drafting the blueprint for the next generation. The Soviet high command didn't want a masterpiece. They wanted a weapon for the end of the world. To outmatch the T-34, the Kremlin needed a machine they could stamp out faster than NATO could reload. The T-64A was the prototype of this ambition. It featured a 125mm smoothbore gun and composite armor. It was a technological leap. But the T-64 was fragile, temperamental. It required elite crews and constant maintenance. For a total war involving millions of conscripts, it was a liability. The solution was the mobilization model. Why simplify a cutting-edge machine? To put it in the hands of a conscript with 3 months of training. The T-72 stripped away the complexity. It combined the firepower of the T-64 with the crude reliability of the older T-62. It wasn't the best tank on the battlefield, it was the most numerous. This design choice had a hidden cost. Removing the loader to fit an autoloader reduced the crew to 3 men. This meant the loss of a single tank instantly erased 33% of the unit's combat effectiveness. There was no backup, no redundancy. The Soviet Union bet everything on a math problem. While the West built precision instruments, the East built a tidal wave of steel. Quantity became its own quality. The Object 172 was the Soviet answer to a simple question. How do you win a war with casualties that would break any other nation? You build a tidal wave. The design was intentionally primitive. It retained the powerful 125mm smoothbore gun and the autoloader, but the complex internals were stripped out. Engineers installed a robust 780 horsepower V12 diesel engine. It was old school. Practicality over precision, quantity over quality. The Soviet High Command watched the trials and made their choice. They accepted the simpler machine. It entered mass production as the T-72, 25,000 units. That number is a hammer blow. It is more than all NATO tanks combined at the time. The T-72 was 40 to 50% faster to build than the T-64. It was cheaper. It was everywhere. Assembly lines across the Soviet Union and allied nations turned into a conveyor belt of steel. Western intelligence watched the trains moving west. Thousands of flat cars, endless echelons of green armor stretching toward the horizon. NATO felt the chill of cold calculation. Their standard 105mm rounds couldn't punch through the T-72's frontal armor. TOW missiles bounced off. The West realized their entire arsenal was obsolete. This fear forced a desperate upgrade to 120mm guns for the Leopard 2 and the Abrams. The Soviets played a double game. They exported downgraded variants to non-aligned nations. These monkey models misled NATO analysts. They underestimated the tank's true potential. But the sheer mass remained an undeniable threat. The Iron Curtain kept the deadliest secrets hidden in the hull. The T-72 was ready for its debut. Soviet theory of massed armor shattered in 1994. The streets of the Chechen capital became a graveyard for the T-72. The column entered Grozny in parade formation. 1994, New Year's Eve. Russian commanders expected a psychological collapse of the defense. They got a kill zone instead. Chechen hunter-killer teams waited in the ruins. They let the lead tanks pass. They waited for the tail. Then, the trap snapped shut. RPG rounds hammered the armor like steel hail. The sound inside the hull was deafening. Clang. Impact. White-hot jet. One rocket hit the lead tank. Another took out the rear. The middle of the column was paralyzed. Could the T-72 fight back? No. The main gun couldn't tilt high enough. Defenders fired from fifth-floor balconies and basement windows. The tank was blind and reaching. Russian crews watched the turret traverse, trying to find a target. Before the barrel leveled, an RPG hit the thin roof armor. The interior turned into a furnace. 20 out of 26 T-72 units from a single regiment were vaporized in one day. To suppress the high-rise snipers, Russia had to deploy ZSU anti-aircraft guns. Self-propelled cannons designed to kill jets were now leveling apartment blocks at point-blank range. The signature of the T-72 was the jack-in-the-box effect. An internal explosion would shear the turret ring. The steel mushroom, weighing 12 tons, would be thrown 10 meters from the hull. Grozny proved that without infantry support, the T-72 was a motorized coffin. The same tactical negligence would be repeated for decades. The Russian army left 200 armored vehicles burning in the mud. 3 years before the firestorms of Grozny, Yugoslav crews and their M84 tanks learned a lethal lesson on the streets of Croatia. The M84 was a local copy of the T-72. Same silhouette, same flaws. 1991, Vukovar. How do you destroy $1 million tank for $500? You trap it on a narrow street. The Yugoslav command expected a breakthrough. They sent a heavy armor column into the suburbs. The target was Trpinska Cesta, a long, thin artery lined with houses. No side streets, no room to maneuver. One way in, one way out. The Croatian defenders waited. They let the column deep into the kill zone. The first RPG-7 hit the lead tank. A second later, another rocket struck the rear. The trap snapped shut. The street turned into a steel coffin. The range was so short, the rockets almost failed to arm. Fighters fired from basements and windows at point blank. The minimum safety distance on the RPG-7 fuses became a problem. They were too close to their own explosions. Visual. Black smoke chokes the street. The optics of the trapped M84s are useless. The crews see nothing but fire and masonry. Trapped drivers panicked. They tried to ram the burning wrecks out of the way. Others steered into roadside ditches and through their tracks. Infantry was caught in the crossfire, crushed between grinding metal and concrete walls. The massacre was systematic. On this single stretch of road, the Yugoslav army lost over 100 armored vehicles. Trpinska Cesta earned its new name, the Cemetery of Tanks. 110 Syrian T-72s recently arrived from the Soviet Union, engaged Israeli armor during the invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Rumors spread fast. The T-72 supposedly knocked out the state-of-the-art Merkava. NATO commanders felt the first chill of panic. Was it true? It didn't matter. By the early 80s, the sheer number of these machines made them a deadly reality for Western armies. The myth of invincibility grew. But the desert held a different truth. While Europe studied the wreckage from the Balkans, the T-72 faced the Western school of tank design on the Middle Eastern battlefield. Saddam Hussein bought hundreds of Soviet T-72M models. They were the elite. At the time, these were some of the most advanced tanks on the planet. Their opponents in the Iran-Iraq War were mostly aging American M60 Pattons and British chieftains. The result was a slaughter. T-72s crushed entire divisions in hours. It became the most feared weapon of the conflict. The T-72M export versions arrived with armor 30% thinner than the original Soviet hulls. Steel was traded for quantity. The war also exposed a fatal flaw. In urban combat, the RPG-7 proved lethal from the rear and the roof. One well-placed hit triggered a massive internal explosion. The entire ammunition load detonated at once. The tank disintegrated. Successes against old Iranian tanks blinded Saddam's generals before Operation Desert Storm. They ignored the mounting evidence of the death trap. Closed caskets for every crew member. The myth of the invincible Soviet machine died in the sands of Kuwait. Operation Desert Storm turned the pride of the Iraqi army into a burning scrap heap. 150 T-72s were obliterated. 0 American tanks were lost in exchange. The Iraqi crews were dug into prepared desert positions. They had the terrain, they had the numbers, but they were fighting ghosts. In the pitch-black void of a nighttime sandstorm, the T-72 was blind. The Soviet optics offered only grainy shadows and darkness. How many tanks can a single Abrams destroy before being spotted? In 1991, the answer was all of them. The Americans saw the world in glowing green thermal signatures. They fired 1,200-meter shots with depleted uranium rounds. The Iraqi tankers died without ever seeing their killers. It wasn't a battle. It was a technological execution. The T-72M was a downgraded export shell. Poorly trained crews sat inside steel boxes without air support or coordination. The armor-piercing rounds from the Abrams sliced through them like hot wire through wax. The world watched as the legendary Soviet tank was reduced to a mass-produced coffin. 150 Iraqi T-72s were destroyed for 0 U.S. tank losses. Soviet engineers built a fortress of steel. They never saw the drones coming. 50 years of design philosophy collapsed in a single decade. Today, the T-72 is a $3 million target for a $500 toy. The battlefield evolved faster than the armor. Modern infantry carries the javelin. It does not hit the front plate. It climbs high and strikes the thin roof. If the missile misses, the FPV drones do not. They carry tandem charges. These warheads are designed to bypass explosive reactive armor. One hit triggers the carousel. The crews are desperate. They weld steel cages over the turrets. They build turtle tanks by encasing the entire hull in metal sheets. It is a gesture of suicide prevention, not a solution. The added weight kills the engine. The lack of visibility kills the crew. Precision artillery guided by overhead sensors finds the gaps anyway. Every T-72 is now a potential burial vault. To see the reality of a late-century cook-off, search Reddit for T-72 Grozny 1996.